I had suggested to Todd that, in fact, the theme of the conference being Carpe Diem, that the theme of this panel should be Carpe Castinum Diem, which is, for those of you who are going back to high school, Latin or had jebbies for instructors, it's seize tomorrow, or literally seize the day that is tomorrow. Because what we're trying to talk about here is how marketplaces are changing, not so that you can simply look at what the gaps are today to position your money or your work or whatever you're going to do, but to position you for where those businesses are going so that you can start to look at where future opportunities are. Now, with industrial, I will confine my comments on the 4 T's, virtually all to transportation, because that's what industrial is about. And when we speak of industrial in commercial real estate, we're almost always talking about distribution space. Virtually none of us in this room will spend a lot of time or make a lot of money on manufacturing space. The reason for that being that manufacturing spaces tend to be owned by corporations and they tend to trade very rarely. Distribution spaces are a very generic space that one firm can use as well as another. They go in them, they go out them. There's no reason to tie up corporate money on. I think today when people are buying and selling good distribution space, the capitalization rates are very low and they're trying to solve for an IRR of around 10. Well, there's no reason for a corporation that's got an average weighted cost of capital of 12 to put their money in real estate if they don't have to. So, in fact, with distribution space, which is plain vanilla, they lease it. It trades frequently. So that's where our businesses are. So that's the reason my comments will be confined to the transportation sector. And I use this picture of the Port of Los Angeles on purpose. This is obviously warehouse rooftops in Carson, and there is the LA harbor right between it. This is the Long Beach side, that's the LA side. You see the breakwater out there. That is, in terms of industrial real estate, simply the driver of everything that happens in Los Angeles. And what I want to try to show you in the 15 minutes is how transportation is changing and why the transportation changes are going to cause changes not so much in the architecture of warehouses. I think that's fairly well fixed for the foreseeable future, but in fact the location of warehouses. Where are they going to be? What communities are they going to be in? And that's about to change dramatically. And I'll fess up before I start that I don't know where they're going, but what I'm going to do is give you the drivers that people are looking at, and I'm not sure that anybody really knows the answer to where the hot, new distribution markets in the United States are going to be, but I'll at least serve up the questions that are going to drive those decisions for you. The first thing that we've got here is that in the since the 80s in the United States, the driver of cost in transportation businesses, and this is one that will surprise virtually everybody in the room, but the single largest component of cost for distribution space is neither the cost of the real estate nor the cost of employment, and traditionally not the cost of transportation. Traditionally, the largest single component of cost has been the carry cost to carry finished goods inventory. That has far outweighed any of the other costs. So the question since the 80s in the United States has been, how do I reduce inventory? Now, we've all heard of just-in-time, and that's sort of one of the issues that has come out of this. But that's why everybody's tried to reduce inventory, that it has historically cost more to pay for finished inventory than to pay for fuel, to pay for real estate, or to pay for personnel in the transportation end. This graph, I want to show you that while, and the graph along the side here, this is simply average weeks of finished good inventory, and these are years along the x-axis. But you can see that in 1985, there were about 1.6 weeks of finished goods inventory. That's all U.S. businesses across the board. So a month and a half. 30 years of immense pressure to drive it down. We drove it all the way down to about 1.2 months or 5 weeks. 30 years of labor to take a week's worth of inventory out of the U.S. system. Big deal, right? Well, let me show you what the big deal was and why this happened. This is a picture of the growth in total U.S. inventories, because as the average inventories were going down, the U.S. economy was getting bigger, so total inventories were going up. Had we not driven the average number of days of inventory down, this is what it would have looked like. The blue line is what inventories actually were. The green line is what inventories would have been if we hadn't reduced the number of days of inventories. This spread in here is between the total U.S. inventories right now, and this figure is in millions, so that's $1.4 trillion total U.S. capital tied up in finished goods inventories, moving back and forth to manufacturing and markets or sitting in a warehouse somewhere. It would have been $1.8 trillion. That is $400 billion wrung out of the U.S. inventory system. And that, in my opinion, has been Sam Walton's great gift to America. That's sort of what he did better than anybody, was find a way to get those inventories down. Now, if you think $400 is not a big deal, let me sort of put it to you this way. If the average weighted cost of capital in the United States of America right now for corporations is, let's make it a 10, let's make it a small number, then what is the average daily cost of carrying those inventories? Just the interest to carry that $400 billion is over $100 million a day. So for all of us, it's reduced the cost of sweaters and cars and skis and big dog drivers and prom dresses and 3.5-inch pumps. The price of everything has gone down because we've been able to reduce inventories. Now, that's been the driver for 30 years, and that's what's caused the locational issues about all warehouse space in America. But what I'm going to tee you up with right now is that's no longer the driver. That is no longer the largest component of cost. And since it's no longer the largest component of cost, in fact, people are going to start to look differently at warehousing. Anybody want to guess, and this is not a tough one to come up with, what the largest component of cost for warehousing has become? I heard somebody whisper transportation. It's oil, folks. It's fuel costs. And that's going to change everything. But where it's going to move warehouses to, again, as I said, I'm not sure, but I'm going to try to show you. This is my favorite map of where we live in America. You don't need to know anything else than this satellite image. We all live east of the Mississippi and a skinny little strip along the West Coast. And with apologies to those of you I'm about to insult, nobody lives in the middle. So when you transport, you have to get your goods to people who are buying your goods. And so that means you've got to get your goods here and here. Okay, just stay with that. Now, this is a map, a famous study done by Deloitte & Touche called Path of Goods that's been produced and reproduced over and over again. But the gray lines on the freeway systems are average tonnage of freight. So the width of the line says how much the freight was carried on those routes. And look at the big ones. I-5 up and down the coast, I-95 up and down the East Coast, and all the way across the U.S. from Chicago to San Francisco and L.A. all the way across to Atlanta. Those are the big routes, but you can see what the routes are. These cities with the big cargo containers, and I so wish they weren't old-fashioned cargo containers that Deloitte & Touche should use. I really wish they were current seaborne containers, transportation containers, but they're not. They made them very old-fashioned. But these have been the big five winners since the mid-'80s. L.A., Chicago, Cranberry, New Jersey, which is like exit 11 or something like that, but it's the New York port, Atlanta, and Dallas and Fort Worth. Now, remember that satellite image I just showed you. Where do we live? Where are the warehouses? Right? I mean, it's almost intuitive. Now, Part of the reason for everything that happens, this is a picture of Shenzhen, China. Shenzhen, China is the third largest port in the world right now. And that's just a picture of it. But here's one of Todd's little Aerotropolis or Patricia's cities are growing. In 1990, Shenzhen was a fishing village. And there's a graph of trade with China. In 1990 or 2000, when they joined the WTO, you can see trade with China was growing at over 18% a year. China joins the WTO. If you thought that graph was steep, look at this one, 25% a year. Okay? It's trade. Well, if you're trading with China and you're making things in China and you're sending them to the U.S., how do they come here? Well, they come from China to the West Coast because that's the easier ocean route. But since Americans don't live on the West Coast, we've got to get the goods to the East Coast. You're starting to see the problem. And that's inventory all the way along the line. Now, traditionally from Southeast Asia, things have also come east to the West Coast of the United States. These are the ports in the U.S., size of them in volume. These are 20-foot equivalent units. Most of the containers that you see on the backs of rail cars or the backs of trucks in the United States are 53 feet. But containers come in all different sizes, but the smallest size is 20 foot. So to keep the count, as opposed to saying we handle X million containers, well, what size were they? The logistics guys have developed a common metric, and it's TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units. So the smallest container is 1 TEU. The 53-footers are 1.3 TEUs. I'm sorry, 2.3. But it's just a way to count. But look at Los Angeles. Los Angeles, and these figures are back to 2009. And in 2010, 2007 was up to 15. 2010's back up here. 2011, it's going back up. This was a very low year. But look at LA as compared to the rest of the country. You have to add Port Elizabeth in New York, Savannah, Oakland, and Norfolk together, and you still don't have the same volume we get in Los Angeles. That port has paid my mortgage and my kids' tuition my entire career. I've heard Antonio Villaraigosa give it credit for 1 million jobs in the Southland. I think he's puffing, but I think the real number is about 800,000. People just don't realize what a big deal the port is, but it is. It's huge for us. We get in LA about 42% of the total U.S. imports come to Los Angeles. We don't use nearly that. In the sort of one-day truck drive reaching around here, you've got less than 10% of the U.S. population. It's coming to us so that we can send it to other people in the United States so that Sam has the good fortune to scrape a little few dollars off the top while that's going on. And so does everybody else in the room. That's been the traditional pattern. Bring it here, redistribute it, send it out. The question is that pattern going to remain? This is just a view, Prologis did this, of supply lines from China, from South China. It's about 13 days to Los Angeles. But again, it doesn't stay here. It's got to go to the east by train, and you'll all remember the Alameda Corridor and what a pain it was when we were building it. But it was to take that inventory out. That's what it was all about. Because that, if it takes 8 days to get across country on a train, it was taking 12 hours to get the first 20 miles, getting it from Los Angeles to downtown. That was to take the inventory down to make those trains go faster. Well, look at this. You're 13 days and 8 days. You're 21 days to New York. And if you go through the Panama Canal, you're 26 days to New York. 5 days of inventory, almost a week's worth of inventory if you go through the canal. So everything's come this way because it's faster. Now, these rail routes across here, how many people know who now owns the Burlington the Burlington Santa Fe Railroad? Warren Buffett owns it, right? Now, I'll tell you one that most people in the room don't know. This line right here from Vancouver, and actually they've got a port right here at Prince Rupert, to Chicago is 5 days on the Burlington. The Canadian Northern will guarantee you 4 days across there. And most people's maps like this will show that from South China to Vancouver is actually 12 days. They actually get a day up on us in the south. I flunked trigonometry in high school, but something about the curve of the globe that I don't understand. But it's quicker going to Vancouver, and then they get a day quicker in Chicago. So they're saving you 2 days on freight. Does anybody in the room know who the largest single shareholder in the Canadian National Railroad is?
Bill Gates.
Bill Gates, Warren's buddy. Okay? So, why? Why are those guys doing this? And, well, we'll play with that for just a minute. This is the paradigm changer. This is it, right here. Oil has gotten more expensive than carrying inventory. And you can see what the price of oil has done, and when it spiked up here to up over $125 a barrel, it came back down, but it's marching up pretty steadily. Now, $100 a barrel is about $4 a gallon diesel, give or take. You're going to see some of these numbers that are in price per gallon. So that's an approximation. And this chart I'm about to show you is at $4 a gallon diesel fuel. And here's what the total cost of warehousing is. This is one that's just stunning to all of us. But in the United States, the total cost of sales that goes into logistics, transportation, is about 9%. Now, over 30 years, it used to be 16%. We've wrenched it way down. But about 9% of every dollar we spend on consumer goods goes to logistics. This chart is, how do you break up that 9%? Well, of that 9%, less than 5% of it is in rent on warehouses. There are so many things that cost more than the rent, like labor. And here was the big one, inventory. But now that fuel's gone up to $4 a gallon, it's transportation. And that's costing twice as much as inventory or better. So the driver is no longer inventory, the driver is now fuel. So what's going to happen is that inventories are going to go back up. Well, fuel is going to be reduced. And you reduce the cost of fuel by reducing the distance that a truck has to travel. Because the paradigm is the bigger the vessel, the less it costs per ton per mile. So a ship is the cheapest way to move things. A train is cheaper than a ship, and then a truck. So how do you get that last truck traffic down to the minimum and keep it on ship as long as you can, or keep it on train as long as you can, and keep the truck part down to the minimum? That's going to change those long supply lines with trucks. And so the centers of warehousing excellence, if you allow, are no longer going to be Los Angeles, Fort Worth, Chicago, Atlanta, and New York. Those are still going to be centers, but other people are going to start nibbling at that pie, and the question is, who's going to get slices of it? And if you're trying to position your money on warehouse, if you can figure that out, you'll do well. I'm running out of time, I know here, so I'm trying to go real fast. Now remember this. This was the traditional move. This is the easiest way across. But this issue is kind of Magellan's problem. Which way do you go around the globe? Well, I want to show you something about the Panama Canal. Right now, the longest vessel that can get through the Panama Canal is 1,050 feet. They're building new locks in the Panama Canal that will open in 2014. It will go up to 1,400 feet. The maximum width is 110. It'll go up to 180. Draft will go from 41 to 60. And this is TEU counts. Vessels containing 5,000 TEUs are about the largest that can get through the canal. And that's going to go up to 12,000. Now let me show you how big some... And then the other question is going to be, do they come through the canal to go to the East Coast, or do they completely change shipping lines? And now Southeast Asia, everything coming out of Southeast Asia, now comes west and goes through the Suez Canal and through the Med. The question is, this stuff right up here, is this also going to start to come west? Now when you go through the Suez has got a huge advantage over the Panama Canal. And that is there are no locks, because the Red Sea and the Med are at the same elevation, so you don't need locks. It's just a big ditch. And so virtually anything can go through the Suez Canal, and we don't have these parameters of size getting through. That's other. And incidentally, if you wonder about Somalia, pirates are just an insurance item on an Excel sheet. Your insurance goes up if you go through the Suez as opposed to coming around the other way. So it's just a number on a sheet. How does it work out? I want to show you the Emma. The Emma is currently the biggest ship in the world, the Emma Maersk. And the Emma travels from Europe to the U.S. She can't go through the Panama Canal. And let me show you how big this baby is. The Emma carries 14,000 TEUs. Those containers. 23 wide across the back. She's 1,300 feet long. She has a crew of 13. If Tom Hanks had been floating on that raft and the Emma had gone by, they'd have never seen him. He'd still be out there. Now look at this. This is the one I wanted you to see. Steve Schwartz, who used to be the CEO of Prologis, figured this out one day when he had too much time on his hands. He wanted to give a sense of how big the Emma was. If you loaded all of those with Nikes, 52 million pair on one boat. Now the Emma is not going to be able to go through the new Panama Canal. And the Emma's only got 2 ports on the East Coast she can call on. One, because of her depth, because the Emma fully loaded will draw 48 to 50 feet depending on cargo, and most East Coast ports don't draw that. The best natural harbor in the United States is Norfolk, which is why the Navy's been there for forever. She can get in Norfolk, and she can also get into Charleston, which is a fabulous natural harbor, but she does have to wait at the sea buoy until high tide to get in and out. So those are the only 2 places she's ever called on. And here's the other issue. You remember the old ships could only be 110 feet wide? These big cargo hooks that pick up these containers and swing them off there and put them on either rail or truck, why would you have one that came out to carry 23 containers when the ships that were coming in could only come in with 17 containers? You wouldn't, right? So there's a whole new set of infrastructure that has to go in for these big babies. Now, did Maersk make a mistake when they made her too big to go through the Panama Canal? Well, let me tell you that Maersk has just ordered 10 ships from Daewoo. When I say just, it was the second quarter of this year. Korean ship manufacturer, they just ordered 10 of them. They're all in the Emma class. They will all be slightly larger than Emma. None of them will go through the Panama Canal. They are all to serve Europe from Asia. They're not even to call on the U.S. There are little disadvantages with long supply lines. That's the only point of this slide. That is an issue. Again, it's an insurance issue. But when your supply lines get long, you've got trouble controlling inventory. You've got to bulk up inventories. You can't have long supply lines and small and anorexic inventories, or clients are going to walk away from you. So inventories go up as you do this stuff. This is all stuff about Los Angeles Harbor that I'm going to go away from because I want to show you the important one. These blue that you see here are the current established ocean terminals in the U.S. There are lots of other harbors in the U.S. besides this. You'll notice Oakland's not on here, and it's because Oakland is primarily a second port of call, which I won't go into here. But those are the ones currently. Now, these are the ports, including here Oakland, and the new Canadian port in Rupert, and the new Mexican port at Laszlo Cárdenas, that are coming online. And I don't mean they're somebody's fantasy. I mean there's money already and infrastructure started. They're on their way. Now what I want to show you is how you get from train, if you're going to keep truck traffic down, put it on a train from the port, right? And you want to go to let's see, Norfolk right here. Norfolk right here. Because at Norfolk, you can go from the dock to the train car. Literally, they take it off the ship, put it on the train. They do the same thing here in Los Angeles. Those are the efficient ones. And then you want to move it. Railroads don't like to move freight less than 250 miles. They can't make a lot of money. And so you move the freight in places that trucks used to take it. And these are inland ports is what they're called. And they are really set up to handle lots of freight, take it off of the back of trains, put it on trucks. But here's the game changer. These are the new inland ports coming in to serve the existing ports. This is Norfolk. Double stacked. They had to change all of the grade separations to the Allegheny Mountains. But that is now double stacked all the way to Columbus, Ohio. Which means freight's coming off here out of the best harbor in America. Freight's coming off of here and going straight into Columbus, which was not a major intermodal. Do you suppose there's an opportunity there? I mean, that's the point of this whole thing, where the opportunity is going to be. And you see what the new intermodals are here. Here's the same slide, but just with names on them. What am I missing here, Todd? I'm almost done. This is the same Deloitte and Touche map, except this isn't truck traffic, this is intermodal traffic. This means trains with containers on the back of them. And this is a look when you're positioning money. Everybody who's working with the institutional players who's looking about positioning money, this is the kind of stuff they're looking at. What are the hot new markets going to be? Where's it going to happen that it hasn't been? And I will end up here with, and I'm going to give credit where credit is due because I don't want to be damned if you put your money into it and I'm wrong. But this was a list made by CWS Consulting Group, and these are their 10 picks for the new emerging distribution locations in the U.S. And I want to go back in closing to Todd's comment that despite the fact I've spent my whole time talking about transportation of trucks, this is a stunning comment down at the bottom of this, and this is from the Areotropolis book. This is a quote straight out of Areotropolis that Todd mentioned. And this from a guy at LAX, that even though the LA Harbor is really proud of the fact that over 40% of all the goods that come into the United States come in from there, over 80% of the value of cargo comes in through LAX, not through the port. Because you're not sending pharmaceutical pills and iPods in a seaborne container. You're putting it in belly freight somewhere. The very expensive stuff still comes in through airports. And LA is one of those cities that Areotropolis just damns because we're never going to be able to get a third runway. Areotropolis' whole position in life is that it is the places like Dallas and Dulles where they had the good sense to buy 15,000 acres before they started and never sell it off to anybody else. Don't let Westchester develop. Don't let that happen so you don't get any NIMBY pressure and you can put in additional railroads. And in LA, it's clear to me we're trapped. We're never going to even get a third runway, much less a seventh one. And I want to end with Dick Ziman. Some of you know him because he's our LA guy. But he's a guy who never in the course of his career from the beginning of the 80s has ever missed a cycle. He started Arden in 1980. He went all cash in 1989. He was the first firm to rebuy. He started rebuying office buildings in 93 when the rest of us were looking at Sam Zell's comment, stay alive till 95. He was the first to build a new tower, which was at the Howard Hughes Center at that cycle. And then, as you all know, he sold out to GE Cap in 2007. Lucky? Maybe. Maybe he is. But I think you got to give him some credit for being willing to put his money where his future vision is. And Ziman simply turns the traditional paradigm about location, location, location upside down and says, nonsense. It's about your timing. Todd, I think that's it. I think that's all of me, isn't it? Oh, can I have fun for 30 seconds? Todd says yes, I can have fun. After I've talked about all the transportation stuff, I want to show you the guys that are really good at this around the world. Some of my really favorites. Is he good or what? But here's the winner, and some of you have seen this on YouTube because it's famous. And look at this, they're passing each other on that road. That's it, folks. Thanks very much.
Sam, thank you. Now, before I start my part,